Ypsilanti, Michigan. April 1944. Inside a factory building nearly a mile long, a bomber moves down a line that never stops. Overhead cranes swing wing sections into place. Rivet guns hammer in overlapping rhythm, thousands of them, all at once, all day, echoing off a roofline that stretches farther than most small towns. A woman in coveralls checks a tag on a fuselage section, signs it, and waves it forward. 60 feet away, a completed B-24 Liberator rolls out the south doors, under its own power, engines already turning, ready for a test pilot. Behind it, another airframe is exactly 63 minutes from doing the same thing. And behind that one, another. This is Willow Run. Somewhere across the Atlantic in a bare interrogation room with a single hanging lamp, a captured Luftwaffe pilot is about to be shown photographs of this floor, and he will not believe what he is looking at. He is 26 years old. A fighter pilot, several confirmed kills to his name, shot down over occupied Europe 2 days earlier, and now sitting across a bare wooden table from an American intelligence officer. His flight jacket still smells faintly of engine smoke. He does not yet know that the photographs sliding across that table were taken inside a single building outside Detroit. He does not know the number 18, as in 18 finished bombers a day, coming off one line, in one plant, in one country he was taught to think of as soft. He knows only what he has been told for years by his own commanders, that Germany builds the finest aircraft on earth, and that America is a country of factories that make refrigerators and automobiles and radios, not war machines. He is about to learn that both of those things were true, and that the second one was about to become the exact reason he lost. This is not a story about a bomber. It is not a story about a factory, or even about Detroit. This is a story about what happens when a nation stops asking, how many can we build, and starts asking, how many can we build every hour. Willow Run did not win the air war by building a better airplane than the Luftwaffe by most engineering measures. It didn't. It won by making the entire concept of shooting down the enemy's air force mathematically obsolete. Somewhere in 1944, the war in the sky over Europe stopped being a contest between pilots and became a contest between a German fighter squadron and an assembly line that did not sleep, did not eat, and did not care how skilled the man in the cockpit across from it was. This is the story of the moment American industry made attrition meaningless, and the moment an entire generation of German airmen had to quietly accept that no amount of individual skill was going to change that fact. To understand Willow Run, you have to go back further than the war, back to a January morning in 1940, when a Ford Motor Company vice president named Charles Sorensen walked onto the floor of Consolidated Aircraft's plant in San Diego, California. Sorensen had spent his career inside the Ford production system, the same philosophy of continuous, standardized, relentlessly repeatable motion that had once turned automobile manufacturing into a national obsession 3 decades earlier at a plant in Highland Park, Michigan. What he saw at Consolidated stopped him cold. Skilled workers were hand-building bombers, almost individually fitting parts, filing them down, adjusting them by eye, the way aircraft had always been built, the way fine furniture is built. It was careful. It was also, to a man who had spent his life timing seconds off an automobile line, unthinkably slow for the scale this war was clearly going to demand. That night, Sorensen could not sleep. By his own account, later published in his memoir, My 40 Years with Ford, he sketched an entire aircraft plant on paper before morning a facility built not around craftsmen assembling airplanes one at a time, but around a single moving line, the same principle that had once made Ford's Model T, the first machine most American families ever owned. At breakfast the next morning, groggy and still turning the idea over in his head, he showed the sketch to Edsel Ford, president of Ford Motor Company and son of its founder. Edsel did not hesitate. He committed the company to building the plant, sight unseen, based on a napkin grade drawing from a sleepless night in a San Diego hotel room. Ground broke at Willow Run in the spring of 1941 before Pearl Harbor, before America had formally entered the war at all. The government contributed roughly $200 million, a staggering sum for a single factory. Ford built the largest manufacturing building on the planet, 3.5 million square feet under one roof. A structure so long that its assembly line had to bend into an L shape simply because a county line ran through the property, and Henry Ford, by most accounts, had no interest in paying Wayne County's higher tax rate for the privilege of building bombers in a straight line. The B-24 Liberator itself was not even Ford's design. It belonged to Consolidated Aircraft, 4 engines, 2 bomb bays capable of carrying 8,000 pounds of bombs, a range of up to 3,000 miles, and critically for what Sorensen was about to attempt, 450,000 individual parts and 360,000 rivets in 550 different sizes. Nobody in Detroit had ever tried to move something that complicated down a line built for automobiles. Nobody anywhere had. Contrast this for a moment with what was happening on the other side of the Atlantic in that same year. German aircraft production in 1941 remained organized the way it always had been. Dispersed across smaller, specialized workshops, often deliberately scattered to protect against bombing, staffed by highly trained craftsmen, producing beautifully engineered airframes in modest numbers. It was a system built to produce excellence. Willow Run was a system built to produce volume. In 1941, almost no one on either side of the ocean understood which of those two philosophies the next 4 years of war were actually going to reward. The first 18 months at Willow Run were not a triumph. They were a near disaster. Ford's automotive engineers tried to apply rigid, stamped steel tooling to an airframe whose design the military kept revising based on combat lessons learned overseas, and every revision meant retooling an entire section of the line. Skilled labor was scarce. Workers who could read a blueprint were being pulled away by every other war plant in Michigan and by the draft itself. Housing for the thousands needed at Willow Run barely existed. It was so bad that pilots and aircrew waiting to ferry finished bombers out to their units slept on rows of 1,300 cots set up inside the plant, alongside the very machines they were waiting to fly. Critics inside the aircraft industry mocked the entire premise from the start. The president of North American Aviation reportedly dismissed the idea outright, comparing it to expecting a blacksmith to build a watch overnight. For a while it looked like he was right. Then, gradually, almost stubbornly, the line began to work the way Sorensen had sketched it on that hotel notepad. Aluminum sections moved down a continuous track instead of sitting in one bay for days. Subassemblies fed into the main line at precise timed intervals instead of being built in place by whoever happened to be free. Interchangeable tooling meant a design change. No longer meant reteaching an entire workforce. It meant swapping a jig and moving on. Willow Run pulled in workers who had never built anything mechanical in their lives, farmers, waitresses, teenagers straight out of high school, trained them on narrow, single, repeatable tasks, and let the line itself enforce the pace, the same way it always had on a Ford automobile floor. A huge share of that workforce was women, by some counts nearly a third of everyone on the floor, the same women who gave the country the image of Rosie the Riveter, doing precision aircraft work that, 4 years earlier, almost no one in American industry believed women would be trusted to perform. By April of 1944, the line hit its stride. Over 468 hours that month, working 29-hour shifts, 6 days a week, Willow Run's workers produced 453 complete B-24 Liberators, a finished 4-engine heavy bomber capable of carrying 8,000 pounds of bombs 3,000 miles into enemy territory. Rolling off the line roughly every 63 minutes. Sorensen's bomber-an-hour claim, mocked as fantasy 2 years earlier, was no longer a boast. It was a Tuesday. Before the war ended, Willow Run alone would build 8,685 B-24, as accounting for roughly half of all Liberators built anywhere in 1944 out of a total production run across every American factory of more than 18,000 aircraft. No aircraft factory on Earth, before or since, has matched what that single Michigan plant did in that single month. If a story like this is worth your time, a like helps keep it in front of more people who'd want to hear it. Now back to the men who had to face what this line produced. For the pilots of the Luftwaffe, the mathematics of this arrived slowly and then all at once. A fighter pilot could be extraordinarily skilled, could down 5, 10, 20 American bombers over the course of a campaign, and still watch the size of the formations grow the following week instead of shrink. German Fighter Command had been trained and had trained its pilots around an assumption baked into every air force in the world before 1943, that attrition worked both ways, that killing enough bombers eventually broke either the will or the capacity to keep sending them. That assumption had held for the RAF early in the war. It had held against every air force Germany had faced before 1943. It simply stopped holding against the United States. Interrogation records and post-war accounts from German airmen describe a recurring, almost disorienting realization that American losses, however severe on any given mission, were being replaced before the gap in the formation had time to matter tactically. Senior Luftwaffe commanders, writing after the war, would describe watching bomber streams that should have been shattered by their kill totals arrive. Again the following month, fuller than before, with fresh paint and fresh crews. It was not that German engineering had failed. Focke-Wulf and Messerschmitt fighters remained, aircraft for aircraft, formidable machines, flown by some of the most experienced pilots on Earth, men who had, by any individual measure, mastered their craft as well as anyone in the war. What had failed was the assumption underneath the entire strategy, the assumption that any air force, however skilled, could shoot down bombers faster than a single Michigan factory, running 2 shifts a day, could build them. Think about what that means for a moment. Somewhere in the winter of 1943 and 1944, some of the finest fighter pilots who ever lived had to sit with the quiet professional understanding that they could win nearly every engagement they flew, and still be losing the war. Behind the production numbers were people the history books rarely linger on. Rosie Monroe was a young widow from Pulaski County, Kentucky, raising 2 small children alone after her husband was killed in a car accident. She moved north to Michigan looking for work and ended up on the Willow Run line, riveting wing panels into B-24s and later B-29s, doing physically demanding, precision work most of the country would not have imagined a woman doing 5 years earlier. She had actually hoped to train as a pilot at Willow, run the plant, ran a training program, but was turned away because she was a single mother. So she picked up a rivet gun instead. In 1943, the actor Walter Pidgeon came through Willow Run scouting locations for a war bond promotional film, met Monroe on the floor, and cast her in it. The image stuck, and though the famous "We Can Do It" poster was drawn from someone else entirely, Rosie Monroe became, for millions of Americans, the real face behind the name Rosie the Riveter. She would not learn to fly until her 50s, decades after the war that had first turned her away. Edsel Ford, the man who had backed Sorensen's sketch without hesitation on that morning in 1940, did not live to see the plant reach its full stride. He died on May 26, 1943, worn down. Those close to him believed, by the sheer strain of pushing Willow Run through its darkest, most doubted year, the year the critics were still calling it a folly. He never saw April of 1944. He never saw the plane an hour month. And in the skies those bombers eventually filled, young men not much older than the German pilot from Section 2 flew Liberators built by hands they would never meet. On missions where a mechanical failure, a burst of flak, or a single well-aimed cannon round could still end everything the factory had built for them. The line could produce the machine. It could not produce the 10 men who had to fly inside it and come home. If your grandfather or great-uncle served in this story at Willow Run, in a Liberator crew anywhere in that chain between the assembly line and the target, his name belongs in the comments. His unit, his theatre, what he remembered. Those details are the actual record of what happened. Germany never built its own Willow Run, and the reason was not steel or aluminum or even manpower. It was doctrine. German industry in the early war years remained organized around craftsmanship and dispersed protected production, optimized to preserve engineering precision and survive Allied bombing, not to chase raw, continuous volume the way Detroit had been chasing it since before the First World War. The culture that had spent 3 decades perfecting the moving assembly line for automobiles turned out to be exactly the culture this war needed, and no other nation on Earth had spent those same 3 decades building it. That is the whole uncomfortable answer. The same industrial habit that put a car in every American driveway is the habit that put a Liberator over Germany every 63 minutes. Picture that fighter pilot again, sitting across the bare wooden table, looking down at photographs of a building longer than most towns, and really understanding, for the first time, that he had not lost an air battle. He had lost an argument about how fast a country could build. The war in the sky over Europe was decided in part by a napkin sketch drawn by a man who couldn't sleep in a San Diego hotel room in January of 1940.